Black Maid greets Korean Mafia boss's dad. Her Busan dialect brought the old legend to tears. The entire penthouse suite went still. Lee Min-jun, the ice-cold architect of Chicago's most disciplined Korean syndicate, had just watched his father, the untouchable lion of Busan, stop moving. All because of her. All because of Bailey. The black woman everyone dismissed, everyone rendered invisible, everyone reduced to a uniform and a cleaning cart. Until she whispered words in a dialect so authentic, so impossibly pure, it dragged the old man back 50 years to the salt-stained docks of his youth. They thought she was background, they thought she was furniture, they were dangerously wrong. The resort's polished marble floors might as well have been a minefield. The designer luggage and encrypted phones couldn't disguise what these visitors truly were. Enforcers, strategists, shadows who moved money and fear across continents. The Lee family didn't build their empire on diplomacy. They built it on precision and silence. And now the patriarch, Lee Sung-ho, the man who made his legend before his son learned to walk, had crossed an ocean to assess his heir's American territory, carrying with him a past heavy enough to sink ships and secrets sharp enough to cut bone. Bailey's hands moved with the precision her grandfather had taught her, every corner sharp, every surface without a single streak. The penthouse suite didn't need cleaning. Men like Lee Min-jun didn't tolerate dust long enough for it to settle. But the head of housekeeping had been clear. Prepare the room as if the president himself were arriving, and for God's sake, don't be seen, don't be heard, don't exist. She understood invisibility better than most. Her grandfather used to say that in Busan, the best workers were like the tide. Always present, always necessary, never noticed until they were gone. He'd been a mechanic at the Jagalchi docks after the war, back when American soldiers still walked those streets and Korean gratitude hadn't yet calcified into complicated resentment. He was the only black face in a sea of survival, and he'd learned early that silence in 4 languages was safer than eloquence in 1. So he taught her the dialect first, not textbook Korean with its formal edges and soul polish. The raw, salty Busan speech of dock workers and fish market ajamas, of men who'd rebuilt a city with their bare hands and women who'd fed families on nothing but pride and pickled radish. Malyul Jalhey Bailia, he'd whisper while teaching her to fold hospital corners on his narrow bed in their South Side apartment. Speak well, but know when not to speak at all. She smoothed the duvet one final time, her reflection ghosting across the floor-to-ceiling windows. Outside, Chicago sprawled in its January grey, oblivious. Inside, she was checking sight lines, noting the position of security cameras, cataloguing exits the way her grandfather had taught her to catalogue engine parts. Old habits from a man who'd survived 2 countries' suspicions. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent 4 years perfecting the art of being overlooked in this hotel. 4 years letting guests' eyes slide past her melanin and her maid's uniform like she was part of the wallpaper. Too Korean for the South Side, too black for Koreatown, too educated for housekeeping, too poor for anywhere else. But her grandfather's voice was a dialect that didn't translate to resumes. His lessons were survival itself. She adjusted the temperature to exactly 68 degrees. Koreans of that generation ran cold, preferred their rooms warm, and verified the bottled water was room temperature, not chilled. Details mattered. Invisibility was built on 10,000 correct details, each one proving you were exactly what they expected and nothing more. The suite was perfect, silent, waiting. Bailey picked up her caddy and moved toward the service entrance, her steps soundless on carpet that cost more than her yearly salary. She had her instructions. She would follow them. At least until the moment she didn't. At least until the moment when silence became impossible, when the past collided with the present, and invisibility shattered like glass against the one thing she'd never been able to hide, the Sultan stone truth of her grandfather's voice, living on in hers. The service corridor was supposed to be empty. Bailey had timed it, 2:47 p.m., between the lunch shift and evening turn-on, when most staff were in the basement break room and guests were out spending money they'd never miss. She wasn't supposed to run into Lee Min-jun. He materialized from the stairwell like smoke, blocking her path with the same casual authority that made his security team move like extensions of his will. Up close, he was younger than she'd expected, but his eyes were decades older. They held the kind of patience that came from watching men break. Stop, not loud, didn't need to be. Bailey stopped, her cart between them like a flimsy shield. Every instinct her grandfather had honed in her scream to lower her gaze, become smaller, disappear into the wallpaper. But she could feel Min-jun's scrutiny like a physical weight, cataloguing her the way she'd been taught to catalogue exits. You caught my father. His English was unaccented, American-educated smooth. You spoke to him. I was doing my job, sir. The professional mask settled over her features, well practiced. Your job is to clean rooms. He took a step closer. The corridor suddenly felt airless. Not to speak Busan Satori like you were born in the Choyangdong markets. Not to know the exact comfort phrase my grandmother used when he was a child. Bailey's pulse hammered against her throat. She'd miscalculated. Badly. She thought the old man's tears would be private shame, quickly buried. She hadn't counted on the son treating her words like a threat that needed neutralizing. My grandfather. I know about your grandfather. Min-jun's interruption was surgical. James Arthur Johnson, army mechanic, stationed in Busan from 1953 to 1968, married a woman from Yeongdo, lived above a noodle shop on Gukch Market Street. His head tilted fractionally, a predator's assessment. What I don't know is why his granddaughter is scrubbing toilets in my hotel instead of using a linguistics degree to teach at a university. The dossier had been thorough, of course it had. The degree doesn't pay rent, Bailey said quietly, and professors don't hire women who sound like dock workers when they speak Korean. Something flickered in Min-jun's expression, not sympathy but recognition. You code switch, I've watched you. You sound different with housekeeping than you do with guests, different with white guests than with Korean ones. You manage your accent like a weapon. I manage it like survival. Same thing. He was close enough now that she could see the details the tailored suit tried to hide, the faint scar along his jaw. The calluses on his knuckles that didn't come from signing contracts. My father hasn't cried since my mother's funeral, hasn't spoken about Busan in 20 years. Then you whisper one phrase and he shatters. Min-jun's voice dropped to something almost dangerous. So I'll ask you once, Miss Johnson, who are you really, and what exactly do you want from my family? The summons came through the head of housekeeping, who looked at Bailey like she'd somehow committed a crime she couldn't name. The old man wants you, Suite 4701, alone. Min-jun's security detail frisked her anyway, professional, thorough, humiliating. They found nothing because there was nothing to find, just a maid with calloused hands and a dangerous voice. Lee Sung-ho sat by the window, backlit by Chicago's winter light. Without his son's presence, he looked smaller, more human, breakable in a way legends shouldn't be. His hands trembled slightly as he gestured to the chair across from him. Ko'un deseoen, sit, but not in Seoul's polite formality, in Busan's gruff expectation. Bailey sat, her uniform suddenly feeling like costume armor. For a long moment he just studied her, eyes roomy but sharp. When he finally spoke, it was in the dialect of his youth, unpolished and raw. You have his voice, not the sound, the soul of it. The way he made Korean bend around his Georgia accent but still carried respect in every word. My grandfather, Bailey's throat tightened. James, the old man's pronunciation was careful, reverent. He saved my life in 1953. I was 17, stupid, caught in crossfire between retreating forces. American medic pulled me into a ditch, kept me breathing until the shooting stopped. His gaze drifted toward the window, toward decades Bailey would never see. Most soldiers left after their tour. James stayed, said he'd found something in Busan he couldn't find in America. My grandmother. Min Suk, a small smile cracked the stone of his face. She worked at my uncle's restaurant. James came every day for 8 months before he found the courage to speak to her. His Korean was terrible, beautiful but terrible. The smile faded. The neighborhood wasn't kind about it. Black soldier and Korean woman. This was not the love story people wanted after the war. Bailey had heard fragments of this from her grandfather, late-night stories, told in the dark when memory became too heavy for silence. But hearing it from someone who'd witnessed it added weight her grandfather's nostalgia had softened. I owed him a debt I could never repay, Lee Sung-ho continued. He asked for nothing, just wanted to build a quiet life, learn the language, love his wife. When I built my business, I made sure no one touched him, made sure his family could live in peace. His hands curled into fists. Then I left for America, and he grew old without me there to honor what he gave me. The old man's eyes finally met Bailey's, and they were wet. When you spoke yesterday, I heard him again. Heard the Busan he loved, the one I abandoned. Heard the debt I never settled. His voice cracked. Tell me, child, did he die knowing he was honored? Did he die knowing his sacrifice mattered? Bailey opened her mouth to answer, to tell Lee Sung-ho that yes, her grandfather had died knowing he'd been loved, knowing his life had mattered. The window exploded inward. Not shattered, exploded, a spiderweb of cracks blooming from a single point as something punched through the supposedly bulletproof glass. Bailey's body moved before her mind caught up, muscle memory from a grandfather who taught her that survival meant reacting while others were still processing. She hit the old man like a linebacker, driving him sideways out of his chair as the suppressed cough of a high-caliber rifle echoed from somewhere across the street. They hit the carpet together, Bailey's body covering his, her hands already pulling him toward the minimal cover of the marble-topped side table. "Stay down," not a request. The Busan Dialect made it a command. The door burst open. Minjun, gun already drawn, his security team flooding in behind him. But Bailey saw what they missed, the micro-delay in one guard's reaction, the way his hand went to his weapon a fraction too slow, his eyes tracking not toward the window but toward the old man's exposed position. Kim down, she didn't think, just moved. Her cleaning cart, heavy with supplies and industrial-grade chemicals, crashed into the guard's legs as he raised his pistol. His shot went wide, punching into the ceiling. Minjun pivoted like a machine, 2 rounds sent en masse before the traitor's body hit the floor. The remaining security formed a shield around Lee Sung-ho, but Minjun's eyes found Bailey's. In that split second, she saw the calculation running behind them, the maid who moved like a soldier, who'd just killed one attack vector and identified another. "Service stairs, now." Minjun grabbed his father's arm, hauling him up. To Bailey, "You two move." "I'm not." "You just saved his life twice in 10 seconds. You're not staying to explain it to whoever's about to storm this room." He was already moving, pulling his father toward the door. "Either you're part of the solution or you're collateral damage. Choose fast." Bailey chose survival. The service corridor was chaos, hotel staff scattering, guests screaming from their suites, alarms beginning to wail. Minjun moved through it like water, his father tucked against his side, his free hand still holding the gun with casual familiarity. Bailey followed, her mind cataloguing exits and angles the way her grandfather had taught her to catalogue threats. They hit the service stairs at a run. Behind them, the sound of boots on marble, too many, too organized to be hotel security. "How many floors?" Minjun's voice was steady, controlled. 47 to ground, but there's a loading dock access on 32. Bailey's breath came sharp but even. Years of carrying heavy carts up and down these stairs had built endurance she'd never expected to need like this. "They'll cover it." "Not the old loading dock, the one they sealed off in 2019 during renovations. I can get us through." Minjun's glance was sharp, reassessing. "Laid." Above them, the stairwell door crashed open. The sound of pursuit echoed down the concrete shaft like a promise. Bailey ran, praying her knowledge of the hotel's forgotten spaces was worth more than their hunters' bullets. The abandoned loading dock led to a maintenance tunnel that led to a steam pipe corridor that led, finally, to a service exit most of the current staff didn't know existed. They emerged 3 blocks from the hotel into an alley that smelled like old grease and February slush. Minjun had made 2 phone calls, each lasting less than 10 seconds. 20 minutes later, they were in a walk-up apartment in Pilsen that looked like it hadn't been updated since the Clinton administration. Peeling wallpaper. Radiator that clanked like it had arthritis. Windows that overlooked a street where gentrification hadn't quite reached. Lee Sung-ho sat on the worn couch, his breathing finally steadying. Minjun stood by the window, gun resting against his thigh, watching the street with the patience of someone who'd waited out threats before. Bailey stood in the center of the room, still in her maid's uniform, still feeling the ghost of the old man's weight as she tackled him away from death. "You knew about Kim," Minjun's voice cut through the silence, not a question. "I suspected." Bailey's hands were steady now, the adrenaline converting to something colder. He started taking calls in the service corridors 6 weeks ago. Always the same time too, 15 p.m. when he thought no one was around. But maids are always around, we're just invisible. Minjun turned from the window. What else? He met someone in the parking garage, Tuesdays and Thursdays, a woman, mid-40s, designer handbag that didn't match her rental car. She'd pass him envelopes. He'd pass her his phone for 30 seconds, then she'd give it back. Bailey's voice was clinical, detached. "I assumed it was an affair until I saw him receiving encrypted messages during your father's arrival briefing." "You read encrypted messages? Flat, dangerous." "I read body language. He got a message, went pale, excused himself, came back composed but sweating. That's not love, that's fear." She met Minjun's stare without flinching. People forget that cleaning a room means you see everything. Notepads with indentations from previous pages. Trash that wasn't quite shredded enough. Laptop screens left open while someone takes a shower. Lee Sung-ho made a sound, half laugh, half cough. "Your grandfather taught you this." "My grandfather taught me that invisible people see everything." Bailey moved to the window, staying to the side, not silhouetting herself. Another lesson. He said in Busan, the dock workers knew which ships carried contraband, which officials took bribes, which merchants watered down their soju. Not because they asked questions, because they paid attention while everyone assumed they weren't smart enough to understand. Minjun's expression shifted, reassessing her again. What else have you seen? Bailey pulled her phone from her pocket. They'd let her keep it after the frisk, just a cheap Android that looked harmless. She opened the Notes app. 3 months of documented observations. Guest names, meeting times, suspicious behaviors. I didn't know what I was documenting. I just knew something felt wrong in the hotel. She handed him the phone. Minjun scrolled, his face hardening with each entry. When he looked up, something had changed in his eyes. This is half my security team, 2 of my accountants, and he stopped, jaw tightening, my father's personal physician. I'm sorry, Bailey said quietly. Don't be, Minjun's voice was ice over steel. You just gave me the map to cut the cancer out. He looked at his father, then back to Bailey. Question is, what do you want in return? Bailey didn't answer immediately. She moved to the kitchen table, gestured for Minjun to bring his laptop. When he hesitated, she simply waited, the same patience she used when guests couldn't decide if they wanted turned-on service. He brought the laptop. Your hotel uses a keycard system that logs every entry, Bailey said, fingers already moving across the keyboard. Staff, guests, everyone. Most people don't know the system keeps deleted logs for 90 days before permanent purge. I know my own security. Minjun's tone carried warning. You know the security your IT director told you about. Bailey pulled up a back-end access screen, entered a code she'd memorized from watching the night engineer fix a glitch 3 months ago. You don't know about the ghost accounts he created, the ones that let certain people move through the hotel without appearing in official reports. The screen populated with data. Minjun leaned closer, his presence a weight against her shoulder. Here, Bailey isolated a sequence. Your penthouse suite. Official logs show only your security team and housekeeping had access in the past week, but the ghost logs, she filtered the data. Someone entered at 3:47 a.m. 2 nights before your father arrived, spent 18 minutes inside, left no trace in the official system. Who? Bailey pulled up the keycard assignment. The master key assigned to Director of Guest Relations, Park Jinwoo. The name landed like a stone in still water. Lee Sung-ho's head snapped up. Minjun's face went absolutely still. Jinwoo has been with this family for 15 years, the old man said quietly, since before we came to America. Which makes him perfect. Bailey kept her voice neutral, professional. He knows your routines, your blind spots. He has access to everything, security codes, guest information, financial records. And she pulled up another screen. He's been using the hotel's encrypted communication system to send messages to an external server. Messages timed exactly with your father's travel arrangements. Minjun took the laptop, scrolled through the evidence with the focused intensity of someone reading a death warrant. These routing numbers, they're going to accounts in Seoul. Accounts connected to the Choi family. Bailey had done her research in stolen moments between room cleanings, using the hotel's business center computers with guest login credentials she'd memorized. Your rivals. The room went very quiet. How do you know about the Choi family? Minjun's voice was soft, deadly soft. Because Park Jinwoo met with someone in the hotel restaurant 6 times in the past 2 months. I served them coffee twice. They spoke in Seoul dialect, thought the black waitress couldn't understand. They talked about removing the old guard and restructuring American operations. Bailey met his stare. The man Jinwoo met with had a Choi family ring, the kind with the iron chrysanthemum seal. Lee Sung-ho stood slowly, every inch the legend he'd been. Where is Jinwoo now? Bailey checked her phone, pulled up the hotel's staff scheduling app she'd cloned months ago. According to the schedule, he's working late tonight, in his office, alone. Minjun's smile was razor-thin, not for long. The plan was insane. Bailey said so 3 times before Minjun finally looked at her with those glacier eyes and asked if she had a better idea. She didn't. Which was how she found herself back in her maid's uniform 48 hours later, walking into the Aurelius Hotel in River North with a cart full of cleaning supplies and surveillance equipment disguised as industrial air fresheners. The Aurelius was Choi territory, neutral ground on paper, but everyone knew the family owned enough shares to control housekeeping schedules, security rotations, and which guests got rooms with views versus rooms with convenient fire escape access. Bailey had called in sick to her own hotel, used a fake reference from a staffing agency Minjun's people had created overnight, and interviewed that morning with a harried hospitality manager who barely looked at her face before handing over a uniform and assignment list. Floor 32, Executive Suites. VIPs checking out tomorrow, so everything needs to be perfect. The manager's dismissal was complete. Just another black face in sensible shoes, forgettable before the conversation ended. Perfect. Bailey took the service elevator up, her heart rate controlled, her breathing steady. Her grandfather's voice in her head, move like you belong, people see what they expect to see. Floor 32 was hushed, carpeted in silence and money. She checked her assignment sheet. Suite 3214 was listed as occupied by Mr. Nakamura, but Minjun's intelligence said it was actually Choi Di-young, the family's American operations chief, the man who'd orchestrated the attack on Lee Sung-ho. The man who thought maids were furniture. Bailey knocked, the polite, unobtrusive knock of someone who expected to be invisible. No answer. She used her master key, called out in English, housekeeping, and entered. The suite was immaculate, which meant Choi hadn't actually stayed here last night, just used it for meetings. Bailey moved efficiently, eyes cataloguing everything while her hands went through the motions of checking towels and restocking amenities. There a briefcase by the desk, left open, confident, careless. She crossed to it, pulled out her phone, photographed every document inside, financial records, shipping manifests, names and addresses, an organizational chart with Lee Sung-ho's picture circled in red. Her hands didn't shake. The surveillance devices went quickly, one in the smoke detector, the universal blind spot, one in the base of the decorative lamp, one in the air vent above the sitting area, each one no bigger than a shirt button, each one military-grade equipment that cost more than Bailey made in 6 months. She was replacing the towels in the bathroom when she heard the keycard beep. Bailey's pulse spiked, but her body stayed calm, continued folding the hand towel with meticulous precision. In the mirror, she watched Choi Di-young enter with 2 men in dark suits. They were speaking Korean, Seoul dialect, rapid and irritated. Can't find the old man anywhere. Lee's people have gone completely dark. Choi stopped mid-sentence, noticed Bailey's reflection. She bowed slightly. Almost finished, sir, 2 minutes. His eyes passed over her like she was wallpaper. Make it 1. Bailey nodded, invisible again. She finished the towels, gathered her supplies, and walked out of the room with everything Min-jun needed to burn the Choi operation to ash. The meeting happened on neutral ground, an abandoned warehouse in Bridgeport that smelled like rust and decades of Chicago winters. The kind of place where blood washed away easily, and nobody asked questions about sounds in the night. Min-jun had orchestrated it perfectly, a proposed truce, a negotiation, Park Jin-woo as the supposed mediator, feeding information to both sides, keeping everyone off balance. Except now Min-jun knew, and he'd brought receipts. Bailey stood in the shadows behind Lee Sung-ho's chair, dressed in black instead of her uniform, a Bluetooth earpiece feeding her the surveillance audio from Choi's suite in real time. To everyone in the room, she was staff. A translator, maybe, certainly not a threat. Choi Di-young sat across the table with 3 of his people. Park Jin-woo sat perpendicular, playing his role as neutral party with the skill of 15 years' practice. The man's face was sympathetic, concerned, perfectly calibrated. We can end this cleanly, Jin-woo was saying, his voice smooth. The attack was unauthorized, a rogue element within the Choi organization. Di-young has already handled it internally. No need for this to become a war. Min-jun's expression was carved from stone. Show me the body of this rogue element. That can be arranged. Show me now. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Choi's men shifted, hands drifting toward weapons they thought were hidden. Bailey's earpiece crackled with audio from the hotel suite. Choi's lieutenants discussing the warehouse, discussing how the old lion won't leave alive, discussing Jin-woo's cut of the restructured territory. She caught Min-jun's glance, nodded once. There is no rogue element, Min-jun said quietly. There's just you, Di-young, and your pet traitor. Jin-woo's mask slipped for a fraction of a second. Min-jun, I don't know what. Don't, Lee Sung-ho's voice cut through the room like a blade. The old man rose slowly, his presence filling the space in a way his frail body shouldn't have allowed. I gave you my trust, made you family, and you sold us to dogs. Bailey stepped forward, her movement drawing every eye. She pulled out her phone, set it on the table and played the surveillance audio. Choi's voice, clear and damning, discussing the timeline for removing both Lees and installing Jin-woo as the American face. Jin-woo's hand went for his gun. Bailey's Busan dialect stopped him cold. Kor undoen, kor gesa here, sit down, you son of a bitch. Not polite Korean, not the careful, respectful language she'd used with Lee Sung-ho. The raw, vicious street dialect of men who'd survived wars and women who'd buried bodies. The words hit like a physical blow, carrying authority that transcended her age, her gender, her skin. Jinwoo froze, something ancient in his hindbrain responding to the command. Bailey continued, each word precise and brutal. You thought I was nothing, thought I couldn't understand, thought the black maid was too stupid to know she was serving traitors. She switched to English, her voice dropping to ice. You were wrong. The recording played on. Choi Di-young lunged across the table. He didn't make it halfway before Min-jun's people emerged from the shadows, guns trained, exits blocked. The Lion of Busan smiled. Now we talk terms, my terms. Now write the final chapter using the outline below. The maximum word count for this chapter is 550 words. Keep the same tone, packing, and emotional style as the previous section. Write in a smooth, flowing story format with no section headings. Chapter outline, Chapter 9, Bridging Two Worlds. The organization is secured. Min-jun offers Bailey a position commensurate with her skills, finally giving her a home where she doesn't have to hide. 3 weeks later, Bailey stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of a Michigan Avenue office that didn't exist on any building directory. Lake Michigan stretched gray and infinite beyond the glass, February wind pushing ice against the shore. Behind her, the space hummed with quiet efficiency, computer terminals, secure phone lines. A team of analysts who'd stopped looking surprised when she walked in speaking fluent Busan Satori one moment and corporate English the next. Lee Sung-ho had returned to Korea. Not in defeat, but in victory, carrying with him the secured loyalty of every operation on the East Coast and the heads of his enemies delivered in the form of federal indictments. The FBI had been delighted to receive anonymous tips about the Choi family's smuggling operations, complete with documentation that would take years to unravel in court. Clean hands, that's what Min-jun had called it. We don't need to pull triggers when we can pull licenses. The door opened without a knock. Min-jun entered carrying 2 cups of coffee, set one on her desk without ceremony. He'd learned she took it black, no sugar, just like her grandfather used to. The Seattle operation wants to meet you, he said, leaning against the wall. They're having issues with their shipping manifests. Customs keeps flagging containers that should be clean. Because they're not using the right HS codes for dual-use electronics. Bailey didn't look up from her screen. I sent them the corrections yesterday. Tell them to stop trying to classify semiconductors as general electronics. That's what's triggering the audits. Min-jun's smile was slight but genuine. My father called this morning, asked about you. I hope he's well. He wants you to visit Busan. Says there are people there who knew your grandfather, stories you should hear. Min-jun paused. He also said you saved more than his life that day. You saved his memory of who he used to be. Bailey finally turned from the window. Her reflection ghosted in the glass behind her, no longer in a maid's uniform, but in clothes that fit, that belonged to someone who didn't need to disappear. And what do you think I saved? The family. Min-jun's voice was matter-of-fact. Jinwoo would have dismantled everything my father built. Choi would have turned our operations into something uglier than they already were. You stopped that. I was just paying attention. You were surviving, there's a difference. He moved to stand beside her at the window. The position is yours permanently if you want it. Director of Strategic Intelligence. Real salary, real benefits, real respect. Bailey thought of her grandfather, of the dock worker who'd learned to read engine schematics and human nature with equal precision. Of the man who taught her that invisibility was a choice, not a sentence. One condition, she said. Min-jun raised an eyebrow. I want to go to Busan, meet the people who knew him, walk the streets he walked. She met Min-jun's gaze. I want to stop hiding who I am. You haven't been hiding, Min-jun said quietly. You've been waiting, there's a difference. Outside, the city sprawled in its winter grey, full of people who moved through spaces they didn't control, spoke languages no one expected, carried histories no one bothered to ask about. Bailey thought of all the invisible people, all the ones still waiting. I accept, she said, on one more condition. Name it. We start a scholarship, for kids like me, the ones who don't fit anywhere. Her voice was steady, certain. The ones who need to learn that being overlooked is temporary, but being underestimated is their greatest weapon. Min-jun extended his hand. Welcome home, Bailey Johnson. She shook it, feeling the calluses that matched her own. Finally, she was both visible and free.